The ship was small and old, and it looked like a metal box floating through space. But Park Ji-won did not care about what others thought of his vessel, because he had finally arrived at the place he had dreamed about since he was a child. And that place was the Valkyrie Interstellar Academy, the most famous military school in the entire galaxy, where the brightest young minds from hundreds of different alien species came to train and learn and become the leaders of tomorrow. Ji-won stepped off his ship and onto the massive docking platform, and immediately he felt the weight of 1,000 eyes upon him. And those eyes belonged to creatures of every shape and size imaginable. Some with scales, and some with feathers, and some with skin that glowed like starlight. And all of them were staring at the small human who had just walked into their world. "Is that the Earth creature?" whispered a tall being with 4 arms and blue skin to his companion. "It must be," replied the other, a reptilian student with sharp teeth and golden eyes. "I heard they actually let one of them into the academy this year, though I cannot imagine why they would waste a spot on such a primitive species." Ji-won heard every word, but he kept walking with his head held high and his shoulders straight because he had not traveled across the galaxy to be broken by whispers and stares. And he reminded himself that he had earned his place here through examination scores, just like everyone else. The orientation hall was enormous and filled with thousands of cadets from across the known universe. And when Ji-won entered, he felt smaller than he had ever felt in his entire life. But he found an empty seat near the back and sat down quietly while the other students around him shifted away, as if he carried some kind of disease. A booming voice filled the hall, and everyone fell silent as instructor Kelveth took the stage. A massive Sundari with 4 muscular arms and eyes that seemed to look everywhere at once. "Welcome to the Valkyrie Interstellar Academy," the instructor announced. "You are here because you represent the finest your species has to offer. And over the next 4 years, we will push you beyond your limits and transform you into the guardians of galactic peace." Kelveth paused and looked down at a datapad in his lower left hand before continuing. "This year, we have a historic addition to our student body," he said. And Ji-won felt his stomach tighten. For the first time in the Academy's 3,000-year history, we have admitted a human from the planet Earth. And his name is Park Ji-won. A spotlight found Ji-won in the crowd, and suddenly every single eye in the hall was looking at him. And the silence that followed was worse than any insult could have been. Then someone laughed. It started as a single chuckle from somewhere in the middle rows, but it spread like fire through dry grass until the entire hall was filled with the sound of mocking laughter. And Ji-won sat perfectly still through all of it, with his face showing nothing. "Instructor," called out a voice from the front rows, and Ji-won saw that it belonged to a large reptilian cadet with scales the color of dried blood. "Is it true that humans still communicate by vibrating air through holes in their faces?" More laughter erupted, and even some of the instructors on stage seemed to be hiding smiles. "Silence," commanded Kelveth, though his tone suggested he was not entirely displeased by the question. "Cadet Risek, while your observation about human biology is technically accurate, we will maintain respect for all species at this academy, regardless of how, shall we say, limited their evolution may be." The laughter continued, and Ji-won felt the heat rising in his chest, but he forced himself to breathe slowly and stay calm, because he knew that reacting with anger would only prove them right about humans being primitive and emotional. After the orientation ended, the cadets filed out of the hall, and Ji-won tried to slip away quietly, but a massive clawed hand grabbed his shoulder and spun him around, and he found himself face to face with Risek, the reptilian who had mocked him earlier. "I do not know how you cheated your way into this academy." "Human," Risek growled, his breath hot and smelling of copper. "But I promise you that you will not last the first month. And when you fail and crawl back to your pathetic little planet, I will make sure everyone knows that humans do not belong among the stars. Ji-won looked up at the creature that towered over him by at least 2 feet, and he felt no fear. Only a cold determination that had been forged through years of preparation. I earned my place here through examination scores, Ji-won said quietly. The same as you, and if that bothers you, then perhaps you should worry less about me and more about whether your own scores were high enough. Risik's eyes widened with rage, and for a moment, Ji-won thought the alien might strike him right there in the hallway. But then Calveth's voice echoed from behind them. Cadet Risek. Cadet Park. Return to your quarters immediately, and I suggest you both save your energy for training, because tomorrow will not be easy, Risek released Ji-won with a shove that sent him stumbling backward. And then the reptilian stalked away with a final glare that promised this was far from over that night. Ji-won sat alone in his small quarters and looked out the window at the wine. Stavon sat alone in his small quarters and looked out the window at the white maze. Stars that surrounded the Academy station. And he pulled out a small device from his pocket and activated it. Myra, he said softly, are you there? A gentle blue light appeared above the device and formed into the shape of a small glowing figure. And a warm female voice replied, I am always here, Ji-won. And I recorded everything that happened today. Though I suspect you do not need me to tell you that these people have already decided to hate you. Ji-won nodded and leaned back in his chair. They think humans are weak and primitive, he said. But they have never seen what our species had to survive just to exist. And they do not know that Earth is classified as a Class 12 death world, one of the most dangerous planets in the known galaxy. Do you think that will matter to them? Mira Askedjuan was quiet for a long moment before he answered. No, he admitted. But it will matter when the time comes. And it will matter when they realize that every weakness they mock is actually a strength they cannot understand. He stood and walked to the window and placed his hand against the cold glass. They think surviving means being faster and stronger and having sharper claws, he said quietly. But they have never met a species that survived by refusing to give up. And they have never seen what happens when you push a human to the edge and expect them to fall. Outside the window, the stars burned cold and distant, and somewhere among them was Earth, a tiny blue planet that had created a species stubborn enough to reach for the stars despite everything trying to stop them. Rest now, Myra said gently, because tomorrow will be harder than today. Ji-won nodded, but he did not move from the window for a long time. And when he finally went to sleep, he dreamed of proving every single one of them wrong. The weeks that followed were the hardest of Ji-won's life, and every single day brought new challenges that seemed designed to break him in ways he had never imagined possible. In physical training, the other cadets moved like lightning while Ji-won struggled to keep up. And the Sundari students with their 4 arms could climb walls that Ji-won could barely reach. And the thorax warriors like Risek could lift weights that would crush a human skeleton to dust. Cadet Park, shouted the training instructor, a muscular alien with skin like polished stone. Your time on the obstacle course was the slowest in the entire class by a margin of 43%. And if you cannot improve, then perhaps you should consider returning to whatever backwater planet spawned you. The other cadets laughed, and Ji-won wiped the sweat from his face and said nothing because he knew that arguing would only make things worse. But then the instructors introduced endurance testing. And everything changed. The test was simple in concept but brutal in execution. And cadets were required to run on a track that slowly increased in difficulty until they could no longer continue. And one by one, the strongest and fastest students began to drop. The Sundari cadets, who had mocked Ji-won's speed, collapsed after 2 hours with their muscles cramping and their forearms shaking with exhaustion. The thorax warriors, who had laughed at his weakness, fell to their knees after 3 hours. their reptilian bodies unable to regulate their temperature, and still G1 ran 4 hours past, and then 5, and then 6. And the instructors began to look at each other with confusion, because this made no sense according to everything they knew about human biology. "How is this possible?" whispered Calveth to another instructor. "The human body should have failed hours ago." But G1 kept running because his body knew something that alien science had never understood. And that was the simple truth that humans were not built for speed or strength, but for endurance. And his ancestors had survived by chasing prey across endless savannas until those animals simply dropped dead from exhaustion when G1 finally stopped after 8 hours. He was the last cadet standing, and the hall was completely silent. In the academic classrooms, G1 faced different challenges. And here his mind became his greatest weapon during a crisis simulation where cadets had to respond to a medical emergency. G1 identified the symptoms and treatment faster than anyone else in the room. "The patient is showing signs of neural toxin exposure," he announced calmly. "And based on the species physiology and the rate of symptom progression, we have approximately 15 minutes to administer a calcium-based compound that will neutralize the toxin before permanent damage occurs." The instructor stared at him with what might have been surprise. "That is correct, Cadet Park," she said slowly. "Though I am curious how you knew that when most students fail to identify the toxin type at all. Humans have been studying medicine for thousands of years." G1 replied, "And we learned because we had to. Because our planet tried to kill us every single day, and we refused to let it win." The other cadets exchanged glances, and G1 noticed that some of them were looking at him differently now. Not with respect exactly, but with something that might have been curiosity. Not everyone was an enemy one day. In the dining hall, a small insectoid creature with delicate wings and large compound eyes approached G1's table where he sat alone. "As always, may I sit here?" the creature asked in a soft clicking voice. G1 looked up in surprise, because no one had ever asked to sit with him before. "Of course," he said. The insectoid settled across from him and introduced himself as Tovin, a Cathri from a planet known for its peaceful and scholarly culture. "My people are also mocked here," Tovin admitted quietly, "because we are pacifists and the other species think that makes us weak. But I have been watching you, G1, and I think perhaps weakness is not what they believe it to be." From that day forward, G1 had a friend. And though Tovin was small and fragile and afraid of almost everything, he was also kind and intelligent, and he saw value in G1 when no one else would. But not everyone was content to watch G1 succeed. The day before a major simulation exam, G1 returned to his quarters to find his equipment scattered across the floor and his tactical suit torn to shreds. And scratched into the wall in deep gouges were the words, "Go home, human." He knew immediately who was responsible. And when he reported to the exam the next morning with damaged equipment, he failed the exercise completely. "Cadet Park," announced the instructor with what sounded like satisfaction, "your performance was unacceptable, and this failure will be noted in your permanent record." Risek stood nearby with a smile on his reptilian face. And Jawan said nothing because he had no proof, and accusations without evidence would only make him look desperate. That evening, Tovin found G1 sitting alone in a quiet corner of the academy gardens. "I saw what happened," Tovin whispered, his compound eyes darting nervously. "I saw Risek enter your quarters, and I heard the sounds of destruction. But I was too afraid to say anything, and I am so sorry." G1 looked at his small friend and shook his head. "It is not your fault," he said. "And I do not blame you for being afraid, because Risek would destroy you if he knew you had seen him. But it is not fair." Tovin protested. "You should report him and tell them what he did." "And what good would that do?" G1 asked. "They already want me to fail. And if I cannot overcome unfair circumstances, then maybe I do not deserve to be here. And besides, the truth has a way of revealing itself eventually. The next day, G1 was summoned to the office of Senior Instructor Orth, an ancient being who resembled a tree made of silver and gold with leaves that chimed softly when he moved. "Sit down, Cadet Park," Orth said in a voice like wind through branches. Joanne sat and waited while the old instructor studied him with eyes that looked like pools of liquid amber. "I reviewed the footage from the examination," Orth said slowly, "and I noticed that your equipment showed signs of deliberate damage that could not have occurred through normal wear. So tell me, Cadet, who is responsible?" Jiwon hesitated and then answered honestly, "I have my suspicions, Instructor, but I have no proof. And I will not accuse someone without evidence, because that is not how justice should work." Orth was silent for a long moment. "Interesting," he said finally. "Your species is very young compared to most in this galaxy, and yet you show a wisdom that many older races have forgotten. So tell me, why did you not simply lie and blame your enemy?" "Because I did not come here to win through deception," Jiwon replied. "And if I become like them, then what was the point of coming at all?" The ancient instructor's leaves chimed softly as he nodded. "I have lived for 3,000 years, Oreth said quietly, "and I have seen empires rise and fall and species evolve and fade away. But I have never seen a young one quite like you, Cadet Park. And I think perhaps the galaxy has underestimated your kind." He leaned forward, and his amber eyes seemed to glow. "Keep walking your path," he said, "and do not let them break what makes you different. Because sometimes the galaxy needs someone who refuses to play by the old rules." Jiwon nodded and left the office with something new burning in his chest. And it was not anger or pride, but something more like hope. Maybe he could do this after all. The Grand Hall of Justice was the largest chamber in the entire academy, a massive dome of crystal and light that had witnessed thousands of tribunals over 3,000 years. And today, it was filled to capacity with cadets and instructors, and dignitaries who had come to watch the human answer for his crimes. Jiwon stood alone at the center of the hall in a circle of harsh, white light. And above him sat the Tribunal Council with Arbiter Thiessen at the center, a crystalline being whose body chimed softly with every movement. "This tribunal is now in session," Thiessen announced, her voice like the sound of breaking ice. "Cadet Part G1 of Earth stands accused of unauthorized assumption of command and unlicensed medical intervention, resulting in potential harm to a fellow cadet. So how does the accused respond to these charges?" Jiwon took a breath and answered clearly, "I did what was necessary to save lives, Arbiter, and I would do it again without hesitation." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, and Thiessen's crystalline form flickered with something that might have been interest. "Very well," she said. "Let the prosecution present its case." Risek stepped forward, his scales gleaming under the lights, and his voice dripped with righteous anger as he spoke. "I was the assigned team leader, and this human deliberately undermined my authority at every turn," he declared. "He questioned my decisions and spread doubt among my team members. And when we encountered a dangerous situation, he seized control without permission and gave orders that put everyone at risk." "And the medical intervention?" Thiessen asked. "He performed surgery on Cadet Sophis, using primitive human techniques that have never been approved by any galactic medical authority," Risek continued. "And if she had died on that table, it would have been murder, pure and simple." The crowd murmured again, and Jiwon felt the weight of their judgment pressing down on him. "Does the prosecution have witnesses?" Thiessen asked. "I do," Risek replied with a smile. "I call Cadet Varan of the Sindari." Varan was one of the four-armed cadets who had been on the team, and he approached the witness platform with his head down and his voice quiet. "Is it true that Cadet Park took command without authorization?" Risek asked. Varan hesitated and then nodded. "Yes," he said. "He gave orders when you were, when the situation was, yes, he gave orders. And is it true that he performed medical procedures that could have been dangerous? Another hesitation, longer this time. He did perform surgery, Varn admitted. But, thank you, Risek interrupted. No further questions. 2 more witnesses were called, and both told similar stories. Their words carefully chosen to make Jiwan look like a reckless fool who had endangered everyone with his arrogance when the prosecution rested. Arbiter Thiessen turned to Jiwan. Does the accused wish to present a defense? Jiwan was about to speak when a small voice echoed through the hall. I wish to testify. Everyone turned to see Tovin standing in the crowd, his small insectoid body trembling, but his compound eyes blazing with determination. You are not on the witness list. Thiessen observed. I have evidence that is relevant to this case. Tovin replied, and I believe the tribunal should hear it. The arbiter considered for a moment and then nodded. Approach. Tovin made his way to the witness platform and his wings. Buzzed nervously as he began to speak before the survival examination. I witnessed Cadet Risek enter Cadet Park's quarters without permission, he said, and I heard the sounds of destruction, and when he left I saw that all of Cadet Park's equipment had been destroyed. The hall erupted in shocked whispers, and Risek's scales turned pale. You lie, he shouted. This pathetic creature is friends with the human, and he will say anything to protect him. Silence. Thiessen commanded, and her crystalline body flared with bright light that silenced everyone instantly. Continue, Cadet Tovin. There is more, Tovin said, and his voice grew stronger. During the attack in the canyon, Cadet Risek froze and was unable to give orders. And Cadet Park saved all of our lives by taking command when our leader could not. And without him we would all be dead right now. Can anyone else confirm this? Thiessen asked. The other witnesses who had testified earlier shifted uncomfortably. And then Varn stepped forward again. I did not tell the whole truth before, he admitted, his forearms hanging at his sides in shame. Cadet Park did save us, and his surgery did save Sifis. And I only said what I said because I was afraid of what Risek would do to me if I spoke the truth. The hall exploded into chaos, and Thiessen had to call for order multiple times before silence returned. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak? She asked. A screen flickered to life above the tribunal and a familiar face appeared. Small and fragile, but very much alive. I am Sifis, the young Kethri said from her hospital bed, and I am only alive because Cadet Park refused to let me die. So if you punish him for saving my life, then this academy has lost all meaning. Tears were flowing down her face, and her voice cracked with emotion, but her words struck the hall like thunder then. A door at the back of the chamber opened, and a human woman walked in wearing the formal robes of a galactic diplomat. And Jiwan felt his heart stop because he knew who she was. Ambassador Yun Seojin of Earth requests permission to address the tribunal. She announced. Thessen's crystalline form flickered with surprise. This is highly irregular. And yet, Ambassador Yun replied calmly, I believe my testimony is essential for this council to understand exactly what they are judging today. She was given permission to approach, and she stood before the tribunal with a dignity that seemed to fill the entire hall. I am not here to defend Cadet Park's actions, she began, because his actions speak for themselves, but I am here to provide context that this tribunal clearly lacks. She pressed a button on her datapad, and images appeared on screens throughout the hall. Images of Earth, of its storms, and volcanoes and predators and wars. Earth is classified as a Class 12 death world, she said, which means it is one of the most hostile environments in the known galaxy for intelligent life to evolve. And every single human alive today is descended from ancestors who survived ice ages and plagues and predators and disasters that should have wiped us out 1,000 times over. The images shifted to show human history, the struggles and triumphs and endless perseverance. We are not the fastest species, or the strongest, or the most advanced, Ambassador Hume continued. But we are perhaps the most stubborn creatures the universe has ever produced, and when we see someone dying, we do not stop to ask permission to save them. Because our ancestors learned long ago that hesitation means death. She turned to look directly at Ji-won. Cadet Park was not admitted to this academy despite his weaknesses, she said. He was admitted because of what those weaknesses forced his species to become. And what you call recklessness, we call courage. And what you call primitive, we call survival. The hall was completely silent. Arbiter Thyssen's crystalline form chimed softly as she processed everything she had heard. And when she finally spoke, her voice was heavy with the weight of judgment. This tribunal has heard testimony from all sides, she announced, and after careful consideration of the evidence, I find that Cadet Park acted within emergency protocols established by Academy regulations, and his medical intervention, while unconventional, was performed in a life-threatening situation where no alternatives existed. Ji-won felt his knees go weak. The charges against Cadet Park are dismissed. Relief flooded through him, but Thyssen was not finished. However, she continued, this tribunal also finds evidence of a pattern of harassment and sabotage directed at Cadet Park throughout his time at this academy, and I am ordering a full investigation into these incidents and into whether certain members of our institution have failed to uphold our standards of fairness and equality. She turned her crystalline gaze toward Risek. Cadet Risek is hereby removed from all leadership positions pending the results of this investigation. Risek's face twisted with rage and humiliation. But he said nothing as security officers approached him. Ji-won stood in the circle of light and felt the eyes of everyone upon him. But this time, those eyes held something different, something that looked almost like respect. Ambassador Yun walked to his side and placed a hand on his shoulder. You did well, she said quietly, and you showed them exactly what humanity is capable of. Ji-won nodded, but his hands were trembling and his eyes were wet with tears he refused to let fall. He had won, but he knew that this was only the beginning. The survival examination was legendary at the academy, and every cadet knew that it would push them to the very edge of what they could endure. But nothing could have prepared Ji-won for what was about to happen on that cold and hostile moon. Cadets were divided into teams of 6 and dropped onto the surface of Volthura 7, a moon known for its brutal temperatures and deadly predators. And their mission was simple in theory, but almost impossible in practice, because they had to navigate through 300 kilometers of wilderness and reach the extraction point within 72 hours. When Ji-won saw his team assignment, his heart sank. Team leader was Risek. Well, the reptilian growled when he saw Ji-won standing with the others. It seems the instructors have a sense of humor after all, and I promise you, human, that if you slow us down even for a moment, I will leave you behind to feed the wildlife. The other team members were a mix of species, including a young Kethri named Sifis, who reminded Ji-won of Tovin, and 2 Sundari cadets who seemed indifferent to Ji-won's presence, and 1 Kurvani, a bird-like creature with sharp eyes and quick movements. The dropship left them in a valley surrounded by jagged mountains, and Risek immediately began giving orders. We move north through the canyon, he commanded, and we do not stop until we reach the ridge by nightfall. Ji-won studied the terrain and felt something cold settle in his stomach. That canyon shows signs of predator activity, he said carefully. And based on the claw marks on those rocks and the pattern of disturbed soil, I believe there is a nest of something very large and very hungry directly in our path. Risek turned to face him with fury in his golden eyes. Did I ask for your opinion, human? He snarled. You know nothing about survival, and you certainly know nothing about leadership. So keep your mouth closed and follow orders, or I will make sure you never reach the extraction point at all. The other cadets looked uncomfortable, but none of them spoke up. And Ji-won fell silent because he knew that pushing further would only make Risek more determined to prove him wrong. They entered the canyon. For the first hour, everything seemed fine. And Risek walked with his head held high and his chest puffed out with confidence. But Ji-won noticed small things that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up, scratch marks on the walls that were fresh, the complete absence of small animals, and a smell in the air that reminded him of rotting meat. Then the attack came. The creatures burst from the shadows like nightmares given form. Massive six-legged predators with armor-plated skin and jaws that could crush bone like paper. And there were at least a dozen of them blocking both ends of the canyon formation. Risek screamed, but his voice cracked with fear, and his clawed hands were shaking as he tried to draw his weapon. Sindari cadets fired their pulse rifles, but the shots bounced harmlessly off the creature's armor. And Sifis was screaming, and the Corvani was trying to fly, but one of the predators leaped and caught her wing and dragged her down. Ji-won's mind went calm and clear in that moment, the way it always did when death was close. Because humans had evolved on a planet where danger was constant, and their brains had learned to shut down fear when it mattered most. "Everyone behind me," Ji-won shouted, and without thinking the others obeyed, because his voice carried an authority that Risek had lost. Ji-won grabbed a thermal flare from his pack and threw it at the closest creature, and the bright light and searing heat made it shriek and stumble backward. And in that moment, Ji-won saw their escape. "There is a gap in the wall behind us," he commanded. "Move now and do not stop no matter what you hear." He grabbed another flare and held his ground while the others scrambled toward the narrow opening. And when the lead predator charged at him, Ji-won waited until the last possible second before diving aside and shoving the flare directly into its open mouth. The creature screamed and thrashed, and in the confusion, Ji-won ran. They crawled through the gap and emerged on the other side of the canyon wall. And Ji-won immediately began assessing the damage, because 2 cadets were injured. The Kovani had deep gashes in her wing, and Sifis had been bitten on her leg. "We need to keep moving," Risek said, his voice unsteady. "We cannot stay here. We need to treat these wounds first," Ji-won replied firmly, "or they will not survive the night. You do not give orders here," Risek shouted, but his protest was weak, and everyone could see that he had failed them when it mattered. Ji-won ignored him and knelt beside Sifis, and he examined her wound with hands that were steady despite everything. "The bite is deep and I can see signs of infection already starting," he said. "But I recognize these plants from the Academy database, and this one has antibacterial properties that might help." He worked through the night while the others rested, cleaning wounds and creating bandages from torn uniforms and gathering plants that could fight infection. And he did not sleep for even a moment, because he knew that if he stopped, then someone would die. 40 hours passed and Ji-won was still moving, still leading, still refusing to give up even though his body screamed for rest. When they finally saw the extraction point in the distance, Sifis collapsed. "She is not going to make it," one of the Sindari said grimly. "The infection has spread too far, and there is nothing more we can do." The medical team that met them at the extraction point confirmed the worst. "Her system is shutting down," the lead medic announced, "and we do not have the proper equipment here to treat an infection this advanced. So she will likely die before we reach the station." Ji-won looked at Sifis, at her small, fragile form lying on the stretcher, and something inside him refused to accept this. "I can help," he said. "You are a cadet," the medic replied dismissively, "and you have no medical training that would be relevant here." "I know human field surgery techniques," Ji-won said, "and I know that the infection is concentrated in a specific area that can be isolated and drained. So if you will not help her, then get out of my way and let me try." The medic stared at him like he had lost his mind. But Sifis's vital signs were dropping, and there was no time for argument. Ji-won worked with steady hands and focused eyes, using techniques that human doctors had developed over centuries of battlefield medicine. And he cut and drained and cleaned while everyone watched in stunned silence when he finished. Cephas's vital signs began to stabilize. "That should not have worked," the medic whispered. "Those techniques are not in any standard medical database. They are in ours," Ji-won replied quietly. And then his legs gave out, and he would have fallen if the Sindari cadets had not caught him. Extraction ship took them back to the academy, and Ji-won slept for the entire journey while the other cadets sat in silence and looked at him with eyes that had changed. But when they arrived, Risek was waiting with academy security. "I am filing a formal complaint," the reptilian announced, his voice cold and hard. "This human took unauthorized command of my team and performed illegal medical procedures that could have killed Cadet Cephas, and I demand that he be expelled immediately." Ji-won stood on exhausted legs and said nothing because he knew that the truth did not always matter when power wanted something else. "A tribunal will be convened," the security officer announced, "and Cadet Park will answer for his actions before the full Academy Council." As they led him away, Ji-won looked back at his teammates, and he saw something in their eyes that might have been guilt or shame, or maybe even respected. Did not matter now. What mattered was that Cephas was alive. And whatever came next, Ji-won knew he had done the right thing. The weeks following the tribunal transformed the academy in ways that no one had expected, and the verdict that cleared Ji-won's name sent ripples through every corridor and classroom and training hall like a stone dropped into still water. The investigation that Arbiter Thiessen had ordered uncovered years of systematic bias against cadets from so-called lesser species, and instructors who had looked the other way while students were bullied and sabotaged found themselves facing consequences for the first time in their careers. 3 senior staff members were reassigned to remote outposts, and new protocols were implemented to ensure that every cadet would be judged by their performance alone and not by the reputation of their homeworld. But the biggest change was in how the other cadets looked at Ji-won. Was no longer the weak human who did not belong, no longer the joke that everyone laughed at in the hallways, and instead he had become something far more complicated and perhaps a little frightening. He had become proof that the galaxy might be wrong about a great many things. "They are still staring at you," Tovin observed as they walked together through the main courtyard. "Though I think the nature of the staring has changed somewhat." Ji-won smiled slightly at his small friend. "People always stare at things they do not understand," he replied. "And right now they are trying to figure out how everything they believed about humans could be so completely wrong." Their study group had grown in the weeks since the tribunal, and now it included not just Tovin and Ji-won but also Cephas, who had made a full recovery, and Varan, who had apologized for his cowardice, and even the Korvani cadet whose wing Ji-won had helped save during the attack. They called themselves the Outcasts, though they said it with pride now instead of shame. One evening, Ji-won was walking alone through a quiet section of the academy gardens when a familiar voice stopped him. "Human." He turned to find Risek standing in the shadows, and for a moment Ji-won tensed because old instincts died hard. But the reptilian's posture was different now, his shoulders hunched and his golden eyes avoiding direct contact. "I did not come to fight," Risek said, and his voice was rough, like the words were being dragged out of him against his will. "Then why did you come?" Ji-won asked. Risek was silent for a long moment, and when he finally spoke his words came slowly and painfully. "My father was a great warrior," he said, "and his father before him, and for generations my family has produced the finest soldiers the Thorax have ever known. So when I came to this academy, I believed I was destined for glory." He looked up at the stars visible through the garden dome, and then a human arrived. He continued, "A small soft creature from a planet we had always mocked. And somehow that human showed me that everything I thought I knew about strength was a lie. G1 waited. I'm not apologizing, Rizek said firmly. Because the thorax do not apologize, but I am saying that I was wrong about you and your species. And I will not make that mistake again. It was not an apology, but it was something. Perhaps even something more honest than an apology would have been. And G1 understood what it must have cost a warrior like Rizek to admit any weakness at all. I did not come here to defeat you, G1 said quietly. I came here to learn and to prove that my people deserve a place among the stars. And if you want to hate me for that, then I cannot stop you. But I would rather we move forward than stay trapped in the past. Rizek met his eyes for the first time, and something passed between them that was not friendship exactly, but might someday grow into respect. Perhaps, the reptilian said. And then he turned and walked away into the darkness. The next day, G1 received a summons to Instructor Oreth's office. And when he arrived, he found the ancient tree-like being waiting for him, with what might have been a smile on his bark-covered face. Sit down, young one, Oreth said. I have something I wish to tell you. G1 sat and waited while the old instructor's golden leaves chimed softly. I have lived for 3,000 years, Oreth began. And in that time I have seen countless students pass through these halls. Some brilliant and some foolish and most somewhere in between. But I have never seen anyone quite like you. I am just trying to do my best. G1 replied, No, Oreth said. You are doing far more than that. And I want you to understand something about why I took an interest in you from the beginning. He leaned forward and his amber eyes seemed to glow. When I was young, my people considered me a failure, he revealed. Because I was slow where they were quick and gentle where they were fierce. And they told me that I would never amount to anything. That I should accept my limitations and fade into obscurity. What happened? G1 asked. I refused to listen, Oreth replied. And I discovered that the qualities they mocked were actually my greatest strengths. Because patience and gentleness allowed me to see things that the quick and fierce could never understand. He reached out and placed a branch-like hand on G1's shoulder. You remind me of myself in those early days, he said. And I want you to know that whatever happens next, you have already proven everything you needed to prove. The year-end ceremony was held in the Great Assembly Hall, and every cadet and instructor in the entire academy gathered to recognize those who had shown exceptional merit during the year. G1 sat with his friends among the other first-year students and tried not to think about how different this moment felt from his first day when the entire hall had laughed at his existence, and now the Academy Commandant announced from the stage, We come to the most prestigious honor we can bestow upon a cadet, the Orveth Commendation, which is given to those who demonstrate leadership and integrity and service beyond self. G1's heart was beating fast because he had heard rumors, but he had not dared to believe them. This year's recipient has shown all of these qualities in abundance, the Commandant continued, and they have done so while facing obstacles that would have broken most cadets. So it is my honor to announce that for the first time in Academy history, the Orveth Commendation is being awarded to a first-year student. The hall fell silent. Cadet Park Jaiwan of Earth, please come forward. Time seemed to stop and G1 was not sure his legs would carry him. But Tovin pushed him gently, and Sophis was crying, and Varm was cheering. And somehow he found himself walking toward the stage. The silence stretched on as he climbed the steps and stood before the Commandant. And then from somewhere in the crowd, a single pair of hands began to clap, then another and another and another, until the entire hall was filled with thunderous applause. And even species who had mocked humans since first contact were standing and cheering. For the small cadet from the primitive planet, the Commandant placed a medal around G1's neck and stepped back. And suddenly everyone was looking at him, expecting him to speak. Jaim looked out at the sea of faces. alien and strange and beautiful in their diversity. And he thought about Earth and about everyone who had ever dreamed of reaching the stars. "I did not come here to prove that humans are better than anyone else," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. "I came here to prove that we belong. And I think I have learned something important during my time at this academy." He paused and let his eyes sweep across the crowd. "We all belong," he continued. "Every species and every world and every individual who refuses to give up no matter how many times they are told they are not good enough. Because that is what it truly means to be strong." The applause erupted again, and this time it did not stop for a very long time later. That night G1 sat in the gardens with his friends around him. And Tovin leaned his small head against G1's shoulder. "What happens now?" The Kethria Skejuan looked up at the stars and thought about all the challenges still ahead, all the prejudices still to overcome, all the impossible things still waiting to be achieved. "Now we finish what we started," he said with a smile, "and we show them what we can do together." Somewhere among those distant lights was Earth, a tiny blue world that had sent one of its children into the darkness and watched him shine, and the galaxy would never look at humanity the same way again.